call the meeting to order. So this is the February meeting of the Council of the Township of Edwardsburg Cardinal, regular monthly meeting. The date is Monday, February the 24th. Now, just before I call for approval of the agenda, there is one change to the agenda. We're going to amend the agenda by removing 8J, which is receiving the service delivery review. And there'll be more discussion Thursday night. So I'm going to be calling for approval of the agenda as amended with the removal of 8J. I'll put in removal of 8J. And Deputy Mayor Deschamps has the motion.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor John Hunter, that Municipal Council approves the agenda as amended with the removal of item 8J.
Good. All right, those in favor? Aye. Motion is carried. Thank you. And next item on the agenda is disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Are there any disclosures here this evening?
None by me.
No disclosures offered. So moving to item 4 on the agenda is a presentation by Mr. Matthew Smith from Public Sector Digest, and he's going to be speaking to us about our asset management plan. So, Mr. Smith, you have the floor. And we have some of your submission here in paper.
Awesome.
Well, maybe.
Well, I guess we'll find out by the end of the presentation. Well, good evening, councillors and Mr. Mayor. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. And I'll warn you in advance if it seems like I'm rushing. It's because I want to get a bite of Little Sisters on my way out of town, which I found out last time I was up here. I think over the summer, which is a great spot to eat. But I'll try not to. I'll try not to go through the slides too quickly here. And then, as always, if you have any questions about either the content of the asset management plan report that's been provided or the presentation, I'm happy to take those at the end of the presentation as well. So for those of you who might not be familiar with the company I work for, so PSD is an enterprise asset management software and budgeting company as well. We have 3 divisions there. A research division, which has a quarterly digital publication for the public sector. We have our consulting division, which I'm a part of, which works with communities across Canada on building out asset management capabilities for small, medium, and large municipalities. We also have our software team as well, which is really the engine behind everything that we do. It's working with communities to implement software tools which can push forward asset management planning, financial budgeting, really focusing on that municipal experience as much as possible. And a more formal introduction of myself too, so my name is Matthew Smith. I've been an asset management consultant with PSD for the past 3 years. So in that role, working with communities across the country on building out asset management capabilities. So just one quick slide here to get us all on the same page with what asset management actually is. I know it's probably a term that's come up quite frequently, certainly over the past few years, maybe at some of the conferences that you've been to as well. But really, what are we talking about with asset management? Well, there's the really high-level academic definition, which I put up on the slide, but isn't always super useful. But coming from the ISO standard for asset management, it's the coordinated activity of an organization to realize value from assets. Super high level, super broad, not always the most useful just to read that 1-sentence description. So how do we apply that to the municipal context? Well, really it's about realizing value from the services that we provide to the community and the assets or the infrastructure that's required to provide that service at the end of the day. And the goal here is how do we maximize value while minimizing cost and risk. So that diagram up there is kind of the triangle of asset management. And whenever you pull on one edge of one corner of the triangle, you're impacting the other 2 sides. So you might have a lot of money that you're able to put into infrastructure. So high cost, and you're going to increase the level of service as a result and decrease the level of risk associated with your portfolio, where you might not have much money at all. And then obviously that's going to impact the level of service. The level of service might go down, and the level of risk might go up, right? So it's always just about finding the balance between those kind of three core values there. We've been working with the township over the past 2 years on implementing an asset management program. So building off of a lot of the great work that Melanie Stubbs and Dave Grant and other staff here have been pushing forward really for a number of years. It's not just the beginning when we came and started working with the township. It's been something that's been an active, ongoing exercise for certainly over a decade at this point. And so what we wanted to do is work with staff to build out some of the internal processes that we're using in order to, again, get the most value from the services that are being provided. And the culminating document here is the asset management plan. So as I understand, you might have received various reports throughout the project, giving you a bit of an update on what we've been working on. So that's a good primer, and really what brings it all together at the end of the day is the asset management plan. What are we planning to do over the next number of years? And it's something that's going to be updated regularly. It's not something that's static, it's not something you're stuck with. It really is dynamic, and I hope that we've provided staff with the knowledge and the expertise to hopefully carry that forward year over year moving forward as well. But it's not just something we've worked on for a couple of months. I do want to stress it is a 2-year project, something we've been working on continuously and improving. So the asset management plan, so you would have been provided a copy of this as well. There's really 2 key components to what it's trying to accomplish. First and foremost, it's outlining the current state of infrastructure. So what's the current condition of our assets today? Do we have a reliable inventory? Are we confident in the total replacement value of our overall asset portfolio? And then ultimately, do we have the financial capacity that's needed to meet sustainability requirements? So not just short-term costs, but medium and long-term costs over the whole life of the asset. And then ultimately, if we don't, can we put in place a strategy in order to close the gap between our needs and the available revenue? So this slide here just gives you a quick graphic of the total replacement cost of the entire asset portfolio. So this is a result of a couple of years of refining the asset inventory data that we have, and definitely taking a look at the most reliable costing methods that we have available. So currently the total value is at about $177.2 million. So per capita that comes out to about $25,000 worth of infrastructure for every person who lives in the township as well. So that's significant, and I think it's a lot of times it's something that maybe the public or even counselors and staff don't truly wrap their head around until they see the figure. There's quite a lot of infrastructure out there. The number tends to grow over time, and so we need to make sure that we're putting in place strategies, practices that extend the life of those assets and provide the greatest value to the community at the end of the day. Taking a look at condition, now there's some more detailed information in the body of the report here, but we took a look breaking it down by asset category. This is just a quick snapshot of the percentage of assets that we consider in very poor, fair, good, and very good condition. So we tried to emphasize getting assessed condition data as much as possible, where someone's actually gone out and according to a methodology or criteria inspected that asset and then use that information to drive forward decision making. This isn't super common in a lot of municipalities. In many cases, we're just relying on age-based estimates of rate of deterioration of our assets, right? So we want to try and move away from that as much as possible. Identify what the actual needs are by going out and inspecting the assets and using that to drive forward planning as well. It can have a pretty dramatic impact on the outcome of the asset management plan at the end of the day. And so under there, you'll see a chart which just shows the percentage of assets within each category where we're using assessed condition data, and everywhere, all the assets that aren't using assessed condition data are using age-based estimates of the condition of that infrastructure as well. So you can see that we're using a combination of both external consultants through road appraisals, regular biannual OSIM inspection reports for bridges and culverts, and then also internal assessments by staff as well for some non-core assets, machinery and equipment, vehicles, land improvements as well. This graphic almost mirrors in a way what you're seeing in the condition graphic as well, but it's slightly different. So here we're looking at service life remaining across asset category again. So the percentage of assets with no service life remaining, we consider those backlog assets that need to be addressed. Those with 0 to 5 years remaining, 6 to 10, and over 10 years remaining. So you can see there's quite a few on the vehicles, machinery, and equipment side that are close to the end of their service life. Part of the reason for that is that vehicles, machinery, equipment don't last as long as other infrastructure, right? So they might have an average estimated useful life somewhere in the 7 to 15 year range. Whereas when you're looking at, sanitary mains, you're looking at something that has an estimated useful life of maybe 75 plus years, right? So there's a higher rate of reinvestment and replacement for those vehicles, machinery, and equipment, which explains some of why you're seeing a higher percentage in those categories there. And the table underneath is not a capital plan, I want to emphasize that. These are projections based on the best data we have available on the condition of these assets and when we expect them to require rehabilitation or replacement as well. So you can see about $3.5 million worth of assets that are considered backlog assets. So these are assets that have outlasted their service life, remain in service at this point, may function well. There may not be an issue regarding its condition, but we need to rethink our assumptions about how long these assets might last out in the field at the end of the day. So you can see there's kind of peaks and valleys here, and I'll explain that a little bit more as we get into some of the later graphics too. So what we want to take a look at when projecting the capital needs moving forward and as far as municipal infrastructure is concerned, there are two different scenarios that we kind of took a look at here. One is this end-of-life replacement only strategy. So essentially what I mean there is an asset is constructed or it's put into service. And then it deteriorates until its end of life, which might be 25 years, so on and so forth. Once it reaches year 25, you expect the asset would be replaced. When in reality, so let's take a road for example, it might have a design life of 25 years, but through strategic intervention in the life of that asset, through crack sealing, maintenance events, or more capital rehabilitation events like resurfacing, we can extend the life of those assets, which is more realistic. That tends to be more of what happens in municipal asset management, but only when there's enough funds available for that to be made possible. So that represents kind of this second scenario that we took a look at in the asset management plan, which I'll call the life cycle strategy scenario. So this is really based on the assumption that we're carrying out more proactive investments in our infrastructure with the goal of extending the life of assets at the lowest total cost to the community as well. So what we were able to do was develop some life cycle strategies for, in this case, two particular asset types. So for the road network, we were looking at roads, and for the sanitary sewer network, we were looking at sanitary mains. And so working with staff here, we were able to determine a fairly realistic representation of how roads are managed. And what we were able to determine through comparing a more proactive life cycle strategy approach to that end-of-life replacement approach is that it can actually save, for roads up to $644,000 in capital costs on an annual basis. Slightly lower for sanitary relining events. So the reason for that being that you can't necessarily apply relining events to all sanitary mains. The flip side to this as well is while the cost may be slightly lower, the impacts on the community as well can be reduced through something like a trenchless relining event for sanitary infrastructure. It's less invasive. And then it also gets more complicated when you're aligning that with other roadwork projects, so on and so forth, right? So typically we tend to see larger cost savings on the road network side. I think if I go back to the previous graphic here, this is an example of the life cycle strategy that we have used as a scenario in the asset management plan. So instead of deteriorating until year 25 and then replacing it, not doing any work to it, which isn't super realistic, there's maintenance events at year 5 and 10. There's a resurfacing event in year 20, which extends the life out to about, in this case, about 40 years. So those resurfacing events can be at a much lower cost than fully reconstructing the road whenever that's required. So the total of life cycle costs end up being much lower for these assets, even though you're investing at an earlier stage in the life than you typically would if you were letting it just deteriorate until end of life. So between the two strategies, we estimate an annual cost avoidance of about $658,000 per year. So taking those lowest cost options into account, we're able to forecast capital requirements, in this case over about a 50-year span. For the report, we look at the whole life cycle of all assets. So for underground infrastructure, that might be 75, 80, 100 plus years. But for this graphic, it's just showing the next 50 years. So this is using life cycle strategies for roads and sanitary mains. And then for all other assets, it's just assuming replacement at end of life. So what you can see here is that there are some peaks, some valleys. The goal here is that, or the idea here is that you're not necessarily changing your tax rate on an annual basis just in order to meet those needs in a given year. You're looking over the whole life cycle of the asset to determine what your average annual capital requirements would be. And you're trying to raise your revenue sources to that level to become sustainable. So in this case, we've identified annual capital requirements across all assets, so both tax funded and rate funded, and I'll break that down in a separate slide, at about $5.1 million. Okay, so now that we know what the annual capital requirement is, what we also took a look at were historical funding practices through a look at some more recent budgets. So we're looking primarily at sustainable sources of revenue, so not necessarily one-time grants. It's more so your tax rates, your user fees. We're taking a look at any sort of multi-year commitment to grant funding programs such as the federal gas tax. So when I look at the funding available, column here, when you look at it, the $2.2 million isn't your total capital budget. It's the portion of it that we believe come from sustainable revenue sources, and the financial strategy in the document is purely based on sustainable revenue sources because you can't necessarily depend on one-time grants on an annual basis moving forward, certainly for long-term life cycle planning as well. So what we were able to do here when we identified the annual capital requirement and the funding available from sustainable revenue sources, we're also identifying the annual capital deficit. This is common across all municipalities. All municipalities have an infrastructure deficit. I've yet to work with one that is really even close to meeting their long-term life cycle requirements. It's just how things work in municipalities, so you have to be a little bit more innovative in how you approach managing life cycle requirements, how you approach changing revenue sources on a year-to-year basis as well. So it's not something to necessarily feel like you're alone in. It's really just about figuring out what's the best way to identify a phased-in approach to have the smallest impact on the taxpayer at the end of the day. This is just a supplemental graphic here, really just talking about the rate of reinvestment. So it's taking that information from the past slide and just visualizing it a bit better. So the target annual infrastructure reinvestment rate that we determined based on that annual capital requirement, dividing that into the total replacement cost, is a reinvestment rate of about 2.87%. The actual average annual infrastructure reinvestment rate, which is based off of so what has been committed to previously under the funding available category, so how much is available divided into the total replacement cost, is at 1.25%. So you can see that there's a gap there in the range of about 1.5%. And you can see that this is the case across all asset categories, and not there's not a huge difference between which categories are majorly underfunded. And you can see certainly machinery, equipment, and vehicles, there's a high reinvestment rate again because of the shorter lifespan of that infrastructure too. So what sort of financial strategy do we want to put in place to address this infrastructure deficit? So based on our analysis, what we're recommending is we kind of split it down into tax-funded assets and rate-funded assets here. So for tax-funded assets, we've identified a 20-year phase-in of a 24.7% total tax increase. So over 20 years, that comes out to about 1.2% annually. And that's just for capital, right? So if you have any other requirements related to increasing operational costs or the rate of interest, that would be in addition to the 1.2% for capital annually. On the rate-funded side, I guess I'll say on the tax-funded side, I would say that's about average. I would say, if anything, you're doing slightly better than average compared to other municipalities that we've worked with, but still there's a ways to go. So certainly that 20-year phased-in implementation is, I think, quite reasonable, but we also do include in the report as well 5, 10, 15, and 20-year phasing periods as well. On the rate-funded side, certainly a larger infrastructure deficit for both the water network and the sanitary sewer network. So again, we recommend a 20-year phase-in. On the water side, so a total rate change of 82.5%. over that 20 years, coming in at 4.1% increase annually, and then on the sanitary sewer side at 3.6% annually. So a little bit higher than tax funded assets. Certainly something worth evaluating, unique context of your water and sanitary infrastructure as well, and how you can address operational and capital needs through a proactive financial strategy. So key recommendations, I've just summarized a few key notes as I was going through the report as well. Step one is what I emphasized early in the presentation is condition data. So implementing a portfolio-wide condition assessment program. Currently, 55% of the assets by replacement cost in the plan rely on assessed condition data. The resultant 45% were just using age-based estimates. Again, I would say that that's higher than average. The percentage of assets that you have in your asset management plan that are relying on assessed condition data is higher than most municipalities that I've worked with over the past 3 years, but certainly still some additional room to grow there. Recommendation number 2, adopting a long-term financial strategy. So looking back to those past few slides I'm looking at as well, to address the infrastructure deficit across all asset categories. So not just for roads, not just for water and sanitary, but also for vehicles, machinery and equipment, so on and so forth. The key there is looking for annual funding from sustainable revenue sources at the end of the day, trying to avoid the patchwork through one-time grant programs and the use of debt as much as possible. Number 3, so continue to update and refine asset inventory data. So that's something that changes year to year, the assets that you dispose of, that you acquire on an annual basis. One key thing I wanted to emphasize was focusing on the stormwater network, which is one area that we identified working with staff as an area for improvement. This tends to be the case across all municipalities. The stormwater network, as I tend to describe it, is kind of the forgotten child of asset management. Everyone tends to forget that it's there and that it requires money to rehabilitate it and replace it over the life of these assets. And it's underground infrastructure as well for the most part. So while we have water and sanitary networks, underground networks that are funded through user fees, stormwater tends to come through the tax levy, and it tends to get neglected more than other categories. Starting there would be building out a more comprehensive asset inventory to make sure that we understand the full value of the stormwater network, and then addressing whatever infrastructure deficit is realized through a proactive financial strategy. Identifying proposed levels of service. So the document, the asset management plan in this phase, and I'll talk about it just in one of my remaining slides, addresses the Ontario regulation requirements for 2021, and which is to measure current levels of service. Moving forward to 2024, there are separate requirements to identify what your proposed level of service is, identify the difference between your current and proposed level of service, and then identify a financial strategy to bridge the gap if necessary. So that would be a next step. And then again, the thing I want to emphasize is that asset management is really about continuous improvement and regular review. It's not something you do once a year. It's not something you do every 2 or 3 years when you put an asset management plan together. It's something that happens continuously on a month-to-month basis, working with township staff as well. So certainly I would encourage them to keep you guys in the loop, as I'm sure they are. Make sure that you're up to speed with how things are evolving on a month-to-month basis. And then certainly updating you as needed on how things are changing there. So one quick slide here just about the province's regulation on asset management planning, which you may or may not be familiar with. So at this point, you guys have implemented strategic asset management policy, so you're well ahead of the curve there. And we have made sure that this plan meets the requirements up until July 1st, 2021, so again, you're way ahead of the curve here. There are some additional requirements for July 1st, 2023, but they're fairly minimal. At this point, it's really just about identifying some key level of service metrics for non-core assets. So core assets are defined as roads, bridges and culverts, water, sewer, and storm infrastructure. We've covered that off in this asset management plan. We've also included non-core infrastructure, but there are a few additional requirements for 2023. Plenty of time to meet those, and then the 2024 requirements build on that a little bit more, okay?
Can you, before you go ahead, can you list a few of the non-core?
Non-core would be vehicles, machinery and equipment, land improvements, which tends to encompass a lot of things, sometimes like parks and recreation assets would be a good example of that. I'm trying to think if we have any others in buildings and facilities, and then that would be all in this
It's
space.
taking us back to that graph.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
Okay.
And then finally here, I just wanted to emphasize what the benefits are that are realized through proactive asset management planning. So certainly good governance and increased accountability, something that you guys are responsible for, showing that you have your affairs in order, that you understand what you own, what it's worth, and what plans are required to maintain it moving forward. It assists with data-driven decision-making. It's not all about data making decisions, it's about humans using data to make decisions, right? So at the end of the day, it's not about automating the job. It's about supplementing the work that the great staff you have here are doing, and taking it to the next level to make sure that you can show to your stakeholders that you're making a difference and that you're addressing the problems at hand. Enhanced sustainability of infrastructure and improved level of service really go without saying. You're trying to improve the level of service for your constituents at the end of the day. This is one way that you can measure it and actually show that you're making a difference. And we want to make sure at the end of the day that you're compliant with those federal and provincial regulations. So that's been a huge emphasis as part of our project as well. So at that point, I'm happy to take any questions either about my presentation or the content of the report. Thank you very much.
Well, very comprehensive. I'm going to start with what I consider to be a really simple question. I've never been able to get a good answer. So if we have a fully compliant asset management plan, and that asset management plan is identifying the replacement cycle of the various categories, is the plan of such completeness and robustness that I should be able to see by pushing a button what my requirements are for, I'm gonna say replacements or improvements this year? And a list comes up with an amount.
Yeah, so we've worked closely with staff using the Citywide Asset Manager to refine the inventory in there, and through that, using that system, you can run reports that will provide you a schedule of when things are projected to be rehabilitated and replaced. But at the end of the day, it's only as good as the data that's in the system. It does take a lot of effort to keep that up, make sure it's accurate, reliable, best representative of how things are actually working in the field. I tend to use that as a starting point, but then again, supplementing the data through the knowledge and expertise of staff who might be able to provide additional unique context to the numbers. So it's not just pressing a button and saying this is our 10 or 25-year capital plan moving forward. It's identifying what those projections are, and also consulting with stakeholders and identifying where you might need to make adjustments to reflect kind of changing conditions, socioeconomic, political, sociopolitical, so on and so forth. So
Okay.
The short answer is yes. The longer answer is yes, but staff are also needed to make adjustments and to make sure it's reflective of actual needs.
Well, and don't forget, there's some elected people sitting around the table here that are out in the community all
Yes.
day, all week long,
Absolutely.
24/7. And we're familiar with, in these small towns, we're pretty familiar with a lot of the asset condition. And from what you've said, most of our work in getting the assessments done, the condition assessment as well as the age assessment as well as other factors, most of that work has been done. But when it comes down to places like machinery and equipment and the source of condition data is staff assessments, well, there's nothing really wrong with staff assessments. They're working with it all the time
Absolutely.
too.
Absolutely.
So is that acceptable to the standard?
Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing wrong with internal staff who in many cases are supremely knowledgeable about certainly the vehicles, machinery, equipment, and other infrastructure, going out and inspecting those vehicles and then feeding that back into the system. The key there is to have a defined condition rating criteria so that no matter who's collecting that data, it's a rating, let's say it's a 60 out of 100, it means the same if one person collects that data point as opposed to someone else.
Oh, I got you. So it has to be a sort of an objective evaluation.
As much as possible, yeah.
Okay, so I'll let the rest of the councillors jump in here, starting with Councillor Hunter.
Nothing too much surprise here. we're always, I think, gonna be in a deficit position because in a township the size of ours, it's gonna be impossible to raise the taxes enough to get it. We're in a deficit position, I don't think, so.
It's certainly a challenge. I don't think it's insurmountable, but certainly a phased-in program over a long period of time. And then, of course, you're regularly updating your asset management plan. The outlook, it's possible things may change. The infrastructure deficit isn't gonna go away. If you blink, it's not gonna disappear. But it's certainly something that you need to address over a long-term period, and then supplementing that through staff and risk management processes is really the key there. There's hope, there's hope.
I think
But there are
the
challenges.
main thing points out to us is in your draft where showing the levels of each asset there is that where we need to really concentrate on the level, the items that are listed as poor. Yes, the other ones were deficit. I think it's the point of selective asset management and picking the worst things to improve on first. Still gonna be in a deficit, we've gotta fix the worst of the worst, I guess you say first, so.
That's definitely part of it. Now, what we'd certainly encourage is not necessarily just looking at condition, but also looking at high-risk assets, right? So it might be a road that services a much higher rate of traffic, but has a slightly better condition than a road that only services very few cars on a daily basis, but has a worse condition. So in that case, we might recommend taking a look at the higher traffic road. So that's part of the report as well. I didn't go into it in too much detail, but risk-based decision-making is really critical as part of your strategy too.
I've got a couple. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for your presentation, Matt. Do we, it's performance software, do we use any of your, you mentioned that, you're doing it with Citywide, do we use currently any of your software, and do the ones that we have mesh with yours as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So staff uses Citywide, which is a product of PSD actually.
Okay.
And we have several, additional modules that supplement that. The primary tool, in addition to Citywide, would be Citywide Asset Manager, Citywide Works, which is like a work order management type system as well. So certainly that was a key component of our project, and while I think we're uniquely placed to work with the township here, is that we know the software the township is using so well, and we have kind of a great sense of where we can use that to improve things. And on the software side, it's actually the largest portion of a company from a staffing perspective. We've put a huge amount of investment into building products and tools that are user-friendly, not just for big municipalities. We work with primarily small and medium-sized municipalities. So that's been a key component of this project, and excited to continue to work with the township if the opportunity arose.
To the road graph with the 658K per year in savings. So taking a road that's freshly done, taking its lifespan to 25, redoing it at 20 with the maintenance that's in there. At what year do you predict that 658 to begin, and for how many years is that predicted to go out? Like the graph does it kick in year 10 and then you realize it to year 20, or how exactly, get it through my mind how that works?
It's tough to nail it down to a specific date and time, right? Because oftentimes it requires an initial investment up front to commit to this new strategy,
Right.
and then the cost savings are more long-term over the full life of the asset. So one thing I should emphasize is that the first scenario, the end-of-life replacement, isn't necessarily where you're starting. You haven't been running roads into the ground for the past 25, however many plus years. So it's not necessarily that you're going to realize $658,000 annually worth of savings. It's comparing those two strategies, which identifies what the potential cost avoidance is there. So if there's no money available for road resurfacing or additional capital rehabilitation event, then you're looking at the additional $658,000 per year. If there's some money available, then you can work your way towards the savings of the $600.
Yeah, so if you implement the strategy and go to the 5 and the 15-year maintenance and do the redo at 20, you won't necessarily realize that as a direct savings, but yeah, I follow.
Right.
I follow where you're going. And so my last one leads to, if I can I go for one more? The prediction of 1.5% shortage on infrastructure or deficit, and the suggested 1.2 capital for infrastructure per year. Are you suggesting that we create a reserve and a special line that 1.2 every year is taken for specifically capital, put in a reserve to take and pick things off of that capital asset plan?
We don't make specific recommendations into the report as to how you should be approaching that. Now, to add a little bit of additional insight there, typically we would recommend implementing something akin to a reserve fund for each asset category. So you're identifying on an annual basis the difference between how much revenue you're bringing in, as well as versus the capital needs there. And once you get to a point where you've raised revenues enough that you're potentially exceeding the needs in a given year, everything additional you put into a reserve fund for future years, right? So that is the idea there, the strategic use of reserve funds, but certainly it's up to township staff and working with council as well to determine the specifics of what that might look like.
Can I just follow up on that?
Go ahead.
So the suggested 1.5 deficit is because we haven't kept up with that, and there is a bit of a deficit, but
Yeah.
You're suggesting at the 1.2, if we did that, eventually we would get caught up and...
Eventually, yeah. So again, it would be a 20-year phase-in. And then at that point, there's the potential that you might even have years where the capital needs are still exceed the average annual capital requirements. And then you potentially need to address those through grant programs, strategic use of debt. Again, that's options that would have to be presented to council.
Thanks, Matt.
No problem.
Councillor Cameron.
Yeah, just a little bit of clarification, and actually for your benefit, I'm on page 8 of the presentation, and I just want some clarification regarding machinery and equipment. And what I'd like to know is, you've got machinery and equipment listed, and then you've got also buildings and facilities. Well, we have 2 arenas, and we have 2 pools, as far as that goes. Now, the equipment and the machinery that is in those facilities, is that in the building and facility line, or is it in the machinery and equipment line?
So I'd have to take a look into the data to give you a firm answer there. It could potentially be in either. I believe we have most under the machinery and equipment. Certainly for when you're taking a look at kind of the core components of the facility,
Yes.
so like HVAC units, that would
Yes.
be more the type of infrastructure you'd see under buildings and facilities. Like non-core components would tend to be under more of the machinery and equipment, but I have to look into that data once more just to confirm that.
Okay, thank you. That's all, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Councillor Dilba.
I just have one, Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry, I usually have my iPad here, and oh my gracious. On page 15 of 330, financial strategy, so are you saying that we should be like an 8.9% increase a year? If you add up our capital and our water network?
So it wouldn't be necessarily adding them up. It's all based on the actual your existing rates and then the value of those assets. So I don't think necessarily you add them together. You have to take a look at how much revenue you're bringing in separately between the water and the sanitary side first.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna see if I can get you to
Tell me the
agree
date,
with me
Mr.
on
Mayor.
one of my theories
I'll
here.
do my best.
So, I'm going back to this concept of end-of-life replacement only versus life cycle strategy to preserve and extend. At this point of our experience with asset management, would you agree that it's just a theory that you can save this amount of money by implementing the life cycle strategy?
So I
Or
would
do
say-
we have concrete examples that show that to be the case?
I believe it is supported by expanding industry literature, both in asset management in the public and private sector. Now, that's gonna depend on a case-by-case basis on the type of infrastructure you're looking at and the approach that's being taken to extend the life of those assets, what specific events and what costs as well. So in this case, we've worked closely with staff to identify recent engineering costs that have been provided, as well as what the impact of those events are on the life of the asset, and to determine how long that should extend the life of the asset. So based on both the expertise of staff here, leveraging the reports that have been provided from past consultants, as well as our work in the industry and asset management, I'm confident that the implementation of the proactive life cycle strategy will reduce costs.
You're confident, but you don't have concrete proof.
Not until you implement them is really
Well,
the
it's
only
not
way
so
you
much,
can be sure.
it's not so much me implementing them, and I'll tell you why. I mean, this is about the third presentation that I've had, including one at United Counties, which was almost identical, trying to make the case that by intervening at the appropriate points, you can extend the life cycle and save dollars. But again, nobody can give me the proof that the theory works.
I would say there are numerous, so it's called like life cycle costing analysis reports that have been produced, which show that cost savings can and have been achieved through life cycle management. But
Okay.
again, it's gonna matter on the unique context of the assets you're dealing with, the costs of those events, and how it actually impacts the life of those assets.
Okay, so now I'm gonna go back to one other concept, and that is the concept, and by the way, again, at United Counties, we do implement and collect via our budget process. We do collect a infrastructure, 1%, I think, or 2% of our tax take is dedicated into an infrastructure renewal reserve. But that goes into the reserve, and then from that reserve account, we draw the dollars that are required to do this year's capital projects. In our particular township here, we have a whole number of reserve accounts that we're trying to set up for future purchases or replacements or improvements. So we keep our eye very closely on the value in those reserve accounts, and when we draw them down to purchase a new truck or something, we try to build them back up again. So and you know, I mean, things like the road network reserve, when we get the gas tax fund that goes in, the gas tax goes into a separate fund, we let it accumulate until we can do something significant with it. So my question is, are you suggesting that in addition to transferring money into those specific reserve accounts, and they're long-time reserve accounts, and we try to invest that money, that in addition to that, we institute a new and a separate 1.25 average annual infrastructure reinvestment fund?
No, I wouldn't consider it separate.
Okay,
because
wouldn't
you're
consider
taking-
it separate.
No, would not consider it
Okay.
separate. So what I believe what you're speaking to, correct me if I'm wrong, is just the method for allocating reserve funds to specific asset categories instead of just having a general reserve fund.
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
So it doesn't matter which approach you take, the number would still be the same. It's just up to staff to make sure they're allocating it to the correct category.
Okay, all right. Okay, are there any other questions, Councilor Hunter?
I just have one, basically on the same premise that our mayor's going on. For this 1.25% that you're saying we should collect above and beyond, so basically you're saying the council should set our budget or whatever our budget needs to be of what we're doing, and then whenever, if it's a 2 mil rate or 2% increase, then we put another 1.25 on top of that every year.
Yeah, well, the key here is that the 1.2% is for capital only. So if you have any rate increases required for operational activities or otherwise, that would be separate. The 1.2 is just capital only.
But we always, our tax rate takes into account capital projects that we're gonna be doing this year.
Yes.
And you're saying we're falling behind every year of what we're doing.
Yes,
So
just as,
basically, if we're gonna catch up, whatever our budget is set for the year, we have to increase that by another 1.25 for capital.
Yes, that would be the recommendation.
Okay, and of course, it all becomes a balancing act in the end.
Of course.
And after all is said and done on the paper, we're the ones that apply the common sense.
Yes.
Matthew, I want to thank you for your presentation. One last final question, and it's kind of got two parts to it. You're telling us now, on the basis of your work with our staff and your knowledge of our own township asset management plan, that we meet all the standards, or all the provincial standards that are required through to July of 2021. But that there are a couple of additional changes or additions that we will have to make to meet the new standard, which will come into effect in July 2023. All right, so my question is, can you tell us a little bit about what we will have to add to what we're doing in order to meet the July 23 standard?
Yeah, so just to meet the standard, the changes are fairly minimal. You'd be looking at establishing current levels of service for non-core asset categories. So those are the vehicles, machinery, equipment, buildings and facilities. So
No, hang on, stop for a second.
yes,
Okay, the level of service for a non-core asset such as a truck.
yes.
But a truck is a core asset.
Not by the province's definition, right? So in the regulation, they make a differentiation between core assets and non-core. They've determined that core assets speak to roads, bridges and culverts, water, sewer, and storm.
Okay, now those, I can see how you set a level of service.
Mhm.
I do not understand how you set a level of service for a truck.
It does become more difficult, because, one kind of metric you could look to is just the average condition of the trucks. So that's a great starting point there. You could certainly take a look at some operational requirements in order to maintain those trucks so that they're available for service. You can take a look at rates of planned and unplanned maintenance downtime for those vehicles. Those are the sorts of things you can start to take a look at for non-core assets when measuring level of service. Really, it's just about taking a look at some key performance measures, and it might be harder to tie a link between those key performance measures and what the community is actually being provided with something like trucks and machinery and equipment.
Okay, so if I say something like, I'm purchasing a new truck, a new snowplow, heavy-duty snowplow truck, dual axle snowplow truck. I want to get X number of kilometers per year at this many dollars in fuel and this many dollars in maintenance. Is that the kind of standard we want to set?
Well, it's really up to you to define which
No.
metrics you find
What does the
valuable.
standard want me to do?
So the standard allows municipalities complete flexibility to determine which metrics they want to use to measure levels of service for non-core assets. So they haven't made any determination like they have for core assets where they've specified you need to measure this, provide us this data. Non-core, you have complete flexibility to say this is what we want to be providing as a service through the use of trucks, machinery, and equipment, identifying a couple data points, and then using that to inform asset management planning and budgeting.
Okay, all right, I see where you're
Yeah, so
taking.
you have much more flexibility there.
Okay.
It's,
But they want a standard established.
they want something established that, the key there is just measuring it over time. How is it changing? Is it improving? Is it getting worse? What's the reason for that? Is additional money required? So it's just something that you can track over the long term through trend analysis to inform budgeting and planning.
Okay, all right. So in other words, I set a standard to get 80,000 kilometers out of this, or 40,000 kilometers per year out of this truck at a maintenance cost of X. I set that standard and then I watch to see if I meet that standard every year.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right. So, are there any other last questions for Matthew before I thank him? Matthew, very comprehensive presentation, and you raise our comfort level as to the status of our current asset management plan. And I know from your presentation and the reports that we get from our staff that we're ahead of many municipalities.
Absolutely.
And it gives us comfort to know that.
Absolutely.
But as you originally pointed out, this has been ongoing for a better part of 10 years now.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Asset management isn't just starting today or 2 years ago. So.
But it seems that every time we go this far, the province wants us to go that far.
It's a never-ending pursuit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so Andrew, or Matthew, well, thank you once again.
Perfect.
And I think you've just got time to get the little sister.
Hey, there you go. Just a little bit of time to sneak in. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so now I'm at item number 5 on the agenda, which is minutes of the previous council meeting. And that's the council meeting of January 27th. Councillor Hunt.
Myself, seconded Deputy Mayor Deschamps, that the municipal council receives and approves the minutes of the regular meeting dated January 27th, 2020.
Okay, the motion is on the floor. Those in favor?
Aye.
Motion is carried. And then I'll deal with business arising from those minutes. If there is any, and I'm on item number 6, business arising. Anyone have anything? Okay, so I have one, if there's nobody else, and that comes on page 3 of 8. And on page 3 of 8, no, I marked it 3 of 8.
3 of 8.
22.
Uh,
Page 22.
Yes, it should be page 22. And it's item number F, the unopened road allowance follow-up for Byers Road. And so my question to staff is, the 2 large signs indicating that the improved road allowance off Byers Road is an unmaintained road allowance. Have those signs been posted?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The signs have been ordered and received, but they have not yet been posted. And once they are posted, then we will send that invoice to the owner.
Okay, so it's in the works.
It is in the works.
Okay, so that was my business arising. And just bear with me for one moment. And now I'm on item number 7 on the agenda, which is the approval of the minutes of various committee meetings held during the month. And the first is the Port Management Committee, Councillor Cameron.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's moved by myself and seconded by Deputy Mayor Deschamps that Municipal Council receives the minutes of the Port Management Committee meetings dated January 22nd, 2020.
Thank you very much. The motion is on the floor. Discussion, if any? Hearing none. Those in favor?
Aye.
Motion is carried. Thank you. And then the Waterfront Improvement Subcommittee, Councillor Dillabaugh.
Moved by myself and second by Councillor Cameron that the municipality council receive the minutes of the waterfront improvement subcommittee meeting dated January 27th, 2020.
Thank you very much. The minutes are on the floor. Motion's on the floor. Those in favor?
Aye.
Motion is carried. And then the 7C, Committee of the Whole, Administration and Finance, Councillor Hunter.
Myself, seconded by Deputy Mayor Deschamps, that the municipal council receives and approves the minutes of the Committee of the Whole, Min and Finance, budget meeting number 2, dated January 27th, 2020.
Thank you very much. The motion is on the floor. Discussion, if any? Yes, go ahead.
Questions? Have we reached out to, so on page 34 of 330, under Public Works, suggestion was made to contact the town of Prescott to see if they would plow New Wexford on a contractual basis. Have we reached out and have we had any word from them?
Thank you.
Through the chair, yes, I have reached out and they've expressed interest in doing so. We haven't had any talks as of yet.
Okay, good. And
Go ahead.
my second point would be on item D, the Latimer Road surface treatment. I'm just gonna read what it says. This project is shared with North Grenville, and funding from taxation is committed if North Grenville includes it in their 2020 budget. The other night at budget meeting, that those dollars were from gas tax. Is that still considered from taxation under that, under that, or should that say from gas tax funding?
Through the chair, it should be through a grant, not taxation.
And not actually through federal gas tax, it's actually through OSIF, Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund,
Is that what the budget document showed?
yes,
OCIF?
yeah.
Okay, while the deputy mayor is just checking his notes, I'll ask another question with relation to Latimer Road. Do we know if the North Grenville budget has been approved yet?
So through the chair, as far as, I haven't heard yet what they've passed yet.
Okay, and so now I'm gonna go back to the previous question asked by the deputy mayor. When we are talking about Prescott plowing New Wexford, saving us the trip there, have you got any kind of an idea of, first of all, costs, and secondly, when we might implement this?
Through the chair, not at this time.
Okay,
It
so
was
that's
just
an
that
ongoing,
It's ongoing discussions.
okay, we'd like to have a report on that as quickly as possible.
I can't find it offhand, but I,
So,
sorry.
yeah, through the chair, it's under the grants portion. It may not specifically say OCIF on that
I
particular
thought we said
capital funding analysis.
Okay, the motion is on the floor right now to approve the minutes of that committee meeting of January the 27th. I'm gonna call the question on the motion if there are no other questions. Those in favor? Motion is carried, thank you. And now I'm at the Community Development Committee meeting, Deputy Mayor Deschamps.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor John Hunter, that municipal council receives and approves the minutes of the Community Development Committee meeting dated February 3rd, 2020.
Thank you very much. The motion is on the floor. Questions, if any? Hearing none, those in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. And now I'm at 7E, the Committee of the Whole, Administration and Finance, February 6th. Councillor Cameron.
Yes, thank you again. It's moved by myself and seconded by Deputy Mayor Deschamps, that municipal council receives and approves the minutes of the Committee of the Whole, Administration and Finance, budget meeting number 3 dated February 6, 2020.
Thank you very much. The motion is on the floor. Discussion, if any? Hearing none, those in favor? Motion is carried. And 7F, Committee of the Whole, February the 10th, Councillor Dillabaugh.
Moved by myself and seconded by Council Cameron, that the municipality council receives and approves the minutes of the Committee of the Whole Administration and Finance meeting dated February 10th, 2020.
Thank you very much. The motion is on the table. Discussion, if any?
Just a quick question.
Go ahead.
Just for my own awareness and knowledge, if I may, to Melanie. Is my understanding, if a property goes 2 years into arrears, it goes to tax registration, correct?
It is, yes.
Does it go immediately, or do we wait until December 31st of that year? Like, say I go 2 years into arrears today,
No, you can't go today.
so it has to be end of year?
It's usually after the year end, and another letter is typically sent in January. So we send a letter in September, kind of signaling that they will be in that position by the end of December of that year, and to come and speak to us to try to set up an arrangement, which a lot of property owners do. And if they have not reached out to us, we send another letter in January, and subsequent to no response from that, that's when we would then proceed to register on the property.
Okay, but I just want to clarify one thing before we go on here, just so that there's no misunderstanding. You have to be 2 years in arrears as of December the 31st. I'm going to use 2020 for example. So if my taxes are not paid up to date, up in full, by December the 31st, 2020, I'm now eligible to be put into registration. I may not get put into registration until March of 2021, and I'm going to be in tax registration for 1 full year, is that correct?
Yes.
So the earliest the township can do the tax sale will be March of 2022.
correct. We would have
Okay.
another year before that would actually go to sale.
Yes,
Okay.
okay. And then the delay between the end of the year and the time that we place you in registration is an administrative delay in our office.
That is correct.
Okay, now go ahead.
Okay, so if we see that there are 3 sent to register, but there are 7 behind, is it safe to assume that we have had some discussions with the other 4, and that's why they haven't been, or they aren't being sent to registration?
Without knowing specific files or their status, in some cases, we might send them for registration, and in that time frame, they've been receiving several documentation, registered letters from the collection agency, and they conceivably have either paid the debt off and then the registration is canceled. And I have done several of those tax cancellations certificates. And we do not do any payment arrangements after they've been registered. The only way we would do a payment arrangement would be if I was to bring to council an extension agreement, which allows them during that time after registration to have a further year before we would act on a tax sale. And they can enter into an extension agreement with the council's approval to extend paying, but after they're registered, I don't have that right to offer an arrangement of payment with them.
One last one.
So then, basically, if no one has talked to you, everything that's eligible for registration goes to registration? Okay, good, thank you.
Okay, so the motion is on the floor to approve the minutes of the Committee of the Whole, Administration and Finance of February the 10th. Any further questions? Hearing none. Those in favor? Motion is carried. And Committee of the Whole, Public Works, Councillor Cameron.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Hunter, that Municipal Council receives and approves the minutes of the Committee of the Whole, Public Works, Environmental Services, and Facilities meeting dated February 18th, 2020.
Motion is on the floor. Discussion, if any? Hearing none. Those in favor? Motion is carried. And now I'm on 7H, Waterfront Improvement Subcommittee, Councillor Dillabaugh.
Moved by myself and seconded by Councilor Cameron, that Woods County Council received the minutes of the Waterfront Improvement Subcommittee dated February 19th, 2020.
Thank you very much. Motion's on the floor. Discussion, if any? Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, again, I just want to indicate my concern with, I think that deadline is today, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure whether we did apply for a grant or didn't apply for a grant, seeing Friday was the first that we had seen any of these in minutes, and we really haven't had any of discussions about this. So just concerned about that, and then wondering, hey, did we actually apply for a grant or did we not?
So through the,
CAO?
thank you, through the chair, we did submit, based on a reduced scope of eligibility around the $99,000 mark submission, based on a much reduced scope that focuses on some of the parking lot improvement, some of the existing what we'll call trail to the east end with an expansion of that trail.
And an improvement.
And an improvement.
It'll be wheelchair wide, will it not?
It will be accessible, yes.
Accessible. Okay.
If we are successful in getting that grant, are we committed to spending and using that $100,000?
So through the chair, naturally there would be an agreement that would be in place, and if for some reason council did not want to proceed with that, then you wouldn't enter into that agreement.
Okay, so by the time we get approval of the application and get an agreement signed, we'll have a better idea of where we're standing.
That is correct.
Any further questions? Hearing none, about to call the question to receive the minutes.
Excuse me, sorry,
Yes.
Mr. Chair, maybe to help Deputy Isham too. It'll be probably 60, between 50 and 60 days we hear from this grant.
Well, and another 30 to 40 days to do the contribution
Yeah,
agreement.
but that's what they said, 50 to 60 days.
Okay, I'm about to call the question on the motion. Those in favor? Need to know who's voting. Those in favor? We got 1, 2. Opposed, if any? 2 opposed. Well, I'm voting to approve the minutes. So motion is carried. All right, now I'm on item 8, application for severance, item 8A, application for severance, 12R Spencerville. Councillor Dillamo.
Moved by myself and seconded by Deputy Mayor Dishaw, that the Municipality Council recommend in favor of the severance B620 Spencerville Inc. with the following condition: that the septic system service of the dwelling unit and that the severance parcel be located entirely on the same lot as the dwelling unit, and 2, that the dwelling unit located on the retained lands to be removed and the septic system to be removed, as recommended by the Community Development Committee.
Okay, motion and recommendations coming forward from the Community Development Committee. Questions, if any? Hearing none. Those in favor? Motion is carried. And this will now go to United Counties. And then I'm at item 8B, additional financial applications. Hunter.
Move
Councilor
myself.
Hunter.
Second by Deputy Mayor Dishaw, the municipal council authorized the purchase of the tax e-notice and custom report library application from Microsoft at a cost. Unisoft at a cost of $1,723 plus an annual software support fee of $345 and fund the purchase from modernization funds as recommended by Committee of the Whole, Administration and Finance.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, discussion, if any? Hearing none. Those in favor? Motion is carried. And item 8C, job site challenge application, Deputy Mayor Dashian.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor John Hunter, that Municipal Council 1 authorizes staff to engage Novatech to take the lead in preparing the township submission to the job site challenge in accordance with their proposed date, January 31st, 2020. And 2, directs that the cost of the project be covered from the Industrial Park Land Reserve Fund with an upset limit of $25,000 as recommended by the Committee of the Whole, Admin and Finance.
Thank you very much. This motion is on the floor. Discussion, if any? Hearing none. Those in favor? Motion is carried. And now item 8D, the Industrial Park Hydro Needs Study. Councilor Hunter.
Move myself, second by Deputy Mayor Dishaw, that the municipal council authorized staff to engage Bioindustry Innovations Canada, BIC, to take the lead in preparing the industrial park electricity needs project with an upset limit of $12,000 and further directs that the cost of the project be funded from the Industrial Park Land Reserve as recommended by the Committee of the Whole, Administration and Finance.
Thank you very much. Motion is on the floor. Discussion, if any?
There was one holdout to providing the signature or information. Has there been any update on that?
Yeah, that was all signed, sealed, and delivered on
Excellent.
Friday afternoon.
Excellent, that's great. Very good.
Those in favor? Aye. Motion is carried. And item 8E, the annual water reports, Cardinal Water System and the EDS system. Councillor Cameron.
Yes, thank you. It's moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Hunter that Municipal Council 1 receives the 2019 annual water reports for the Cardinal Water System and Edwardsburg Industrial Park Distribution System, and 2, direct staff to post the annual reports to the township website And 3, direct staff to notify users via social media and local newspapers of the report availability, as recommended by the Committee of the Whole, Public Works, Environmental Services, and Facilities.
Thank you very much. The motion is on the floor. Discussion, if any. Hearing none, those in favor? Motion is carried. And I'm just gonna be 1 minute here, and then when I be at item number F, which will be 8F. Just a minute to get there. So item 8F, Councillor Dillabaugh.
Moved by myself and seconded by Deputy Mayor Dishoff, that the Municipality Council, 1, received the 2019 annual report of the Cardinal Water Pollution Control Plant, and 2, direct staff to submit the report to MECP prior to March 31st, 2020, deadline as recommended by the Committee of the Whole, the Public Works Environmental Services Facility.
Thank you very much. The motion is on the floor. Discussion, if any. Hearing none, those in favor? Motion is carried. And next is going to be 8G. Take a minute to get there.
Take a minute, but it takes 3 minutes.
What's that?
Do you have a glass of water?
No, my coffee empty.
All right, 8G, Councillor Hunter.
Here we go.
Move myself, second, Deputy Mayor Dishoff. Whereas the amount of single-use plastic leaking into our lakes, rivers, and waterways is a growing area of public concern, and whereas reducing the waste we generate and reincorporating valuable resources from our waste stream into new goods can reduce greenhouse gas significantly. And whereas the transition of full producer responsibility for packaging, paper, and paper products is critical to reducing waste, improving recycling, and driving better economic and environmental outcomes. And whereas the move to a circular economy is a global movement, and that the transition of the Blue Box program would go a long way towards this outcome. And whereas the Corporation of the Township of Edgersburg Cardinal is supportive of a timely, seamless, and successful transition of Blue Box programs to full financial and operational responsibility by producers of packaging, paper, and paper products. And whereas the Association of Municipalities of Ontario has requested municipal governments with Blue Box programs to provide an indication of the best date to transition our Blue Box program to full producer responsibility. Now therefore be it resolved in resolution that the Corporation of the Township of Edgersburg Cardinal would consider a transition of our Blue Box program to full producer responsibility by January 2022. And further, that this decision is based on the following rationale: that the 1, that the contract between Township of Edgersburg Cardinal and Waste Connections expires on February 22nd, and 2, that the Council of the Township of Edgersburg Cardinal may have an interest in providing services such as contract administration and management and in-house collection services. And further, that the Corporation of the Township of Edgersburg Cardinal would be interested in providing in-house collection services to producers should the Township of the producers be able to arrive at a mutual agreeable commercial terms. And further, that any question regarding this resolution can be directed to the Directors of Operations, Gord Shaw. And further, that this resolution be forwarded to the Associated Municipalities of Ontario, AMO, and the Ministry of Environment, Conservation, and Parks. Got overtime for that.
Well done. Thank you very much. Motion is on the floor. Discussion, if any. Hearing none, those in favor?
Aye.
Motion is carried. And, where am I here? 8H, which is the 2020 Port Capital and Operating Budget. Councillor Cameron.
Yes, thank you. It's moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Hunter, that Municipal Council, 1, approves the Port of Johnstown 2020 capital budget, including the 2019 carryover as presented, And two, approves the Port of Johnstown 2020 operating budget reserve revenues and expenses as presented, as recommended by the Port Management Committee.
Okay, thank you very much. Motion is on the table, discussion if any. Hearing none, those in favor? Motion is carried. And then item 8I, port management fees. And I think that's Councillor Hunter.
Move myself, seconded by Deputy Mayor Deschamps, that the municipal council, one, approve an annual increase of 1.5% in Port of Johnstown management fees for the township of Edwardsburg Cardinal. And two, that this increase be retroactive to January 1st, 2020 and carry through to 2029 as recommended by the Port Management Committee.
And there's a little typing error there in clause number 2, that this increase. And the T is missing from this. However, intent is clear. Discussion if any. Hearing none, those in favor? Aye. Motion is carried. And now I'm at item 8K, the 2020 Public Library Board Municipal Grant. Councillor Dillabaugh.
Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Hunter, that municipality council approves $90,000 municipality grant for the 2020 Edwardsburg Cardinal Public Library Board budget, as recommended by the Committee of the Whole and Administration and Finance.
Thank you very much. Motion is on the floor. Those in favor?
Aye.
Motion is carried. And item 8L, pre-budget approval, rec department vehicle, Councillor Hunter.
Move myself, seconded by Deputy Mayor Deschamps. That the municipal council, one, authorize pre-budget approval for the purchase of a recreational department vehicle with 0% interest rate financing on a 2019 model for 48 months at $879 monthly, with a payment based on a $42,192 retail price. And two, authorize staff to execute the required documents as recommended by Committee of the Whole, Administration and Finance.
Okay, motion is on the table. Those in favor?
Aye.
Motion is carried.
I had a quick question.
Go ahead.
If there is a fleet opportunity out there that reduces the monthly payment lower than that, it doesn't offer a 0% interest rate, thus, but still at a cheaper dollar value, if it doesn't offer it at 0%, say it's 2.2, do we then disqualify the 2.2 even though it's a lower dollar value? Like say it comes in at 8.30, but it's a 2.2 interest rate. By passing this the way that we're about to pass it, do we disqualify that fleet offer that may come in cheaper, but not have a 0% interest rate?
Well, through the chair of the CAO, I believe we're acting on the basis of a recommendation which arose from staff investigation, did we not?
Yes, we've had some research done on that, and at the time, that was the best.
Okay, so,
But-
I'll go back with the question to the deputy mayor, just for clarification. Do you have, knowledge or information that such an alternative opportunity exists?
I do, but fleet opportunities don't come at 0%, and the price that may come as a fleet opportunity could potentially be less than what the 0% interest payment would be. It's been said to me that, remember, 0% is not always the best price.
No, but the issue is a question of process here, because I'm asking if you have knowledge of such an opportunity, and if there was knowledge of such an opportunity, was it available at the time? This is coming from Administration and Finance Committee. What was the date of that meeting?
To the chair, last Thursday, so February 20th.
Okay, so was that information available on February the 20th?
Not directly to me then, I didn't pose the question until after that, and then the person that I asked the question in regard to for my own knowledge, it was a conversation ongoing this weekend and today.
Okay, so, this, by virtue of this motion, and I believe, I just want to go back a step. So we declared the motion carried. So the motion is a motion of council. That was passed in good faith on the basis of the recommendation, or on the basis of the information that council had at the time. You're bringing forward new information. So, my question to the CAO is this: does the staff still search for better opportunity, as outlined by Deputy Mayor Deschamps, in spite of the fact that there is direction provided by this motion?
Well, through the chair, that makes the situation a little bit awkward. At the time when this was brought forward, there was no information to indicate that there was potentially a non-0% interest financing that would be potentially at a lower rate. Lower price.
And of course, the other factor that's entering into this is that this motion directs the purchase of a 2019 model, and I believe that the information available to us at the time of the committee was that these were 2019 models while still available.
That is correct.
And Deputy Mayor is referring to fleet opportunities, which would not be new vehicles, at least I don't think they would be. Oh, they are.
2020 is likely a lot.
Well, this is, okay, so, I mean, we all act in the interest of the best purchasing, for taxpayers' dollars. So, I would indicate that my feeling would be that the staff would act in the best interest of taxpayers' dollars, and were there a different opportunity available, that would come to us at Thursday night's budget meeting, in which case, I mean, the only alternative to us, if there was a different opportunity, would be to revisit this motion at another council meeting. And we have no other council, well, we may end up with a special council meeting sometime between now and the end of March, but this is council direction. And the budget meeting on Thursday night will be a committee meeting, not capable of making decisions, and certainly not capable of counteracting council decisions. So, I mean, all I can do is say to staff, it's important that if other opportunities exist, that they be examined quickly, and if there are better deals available, that be brought forward at the budget meeting. And I'll say to the clerk, if necessary, we have to schedule a special council meeting to deal with the conundrum, we will do so.
So through the chair, with this new information, I would assume that it's a 48-month?
Listen, I don't know what we're dealing with here. I'm just getting new information sitting here at the table.
So, okay, no, so
I think for me, the thing that's throwing me is the 0%. I mean, if the dollar value stays at $8.79 all in, what difference does it make what the interest rate is?
Well, that's not the real issue here, though. The real issue here is that there's new information coming forward at an awkward time. That's the real issue.
So we'll get that information and bring something back if required at the Thursday meeting.
Okay,
That's what we can
we'll have
do
to
at
be
this
content with
particular
that at
time.
this point. where am I now? That was the pre-budget approval of a recreation departmental vehicle. Now, item 8M, increase to the operational budget, Councillor Hunter.
Move myself, second by Deputy Mayor Deschamps, the municipal council increase the 2020 recreation administration operation budget, Department 81, by $7,911 as recommended by the Committee of the Whole, Administration and Finance.
All right, now, that motion is on the table, which creates another awkward situation, because we all know that the reason for that 7,911 being added to the operation budget was because of the previous motion that that vehicle would be financed at $879 a month rather than purchased outright. Now, if we put this motion forward, it just complicates the issue. So I'm going to ask the mover and the seconder if they're prepared to table this motion until we determine where we're sitting as of the meeting Thursday night. I'm looking for a motion to table. Otherwise, I'm gonna call the question on this motion. Once I call the question on this motion, this further solidifies the earlier motion.
No, I don't really think Mayor solidifies it, it just says we're increasing the budget, it's not directed at any particular one item in the motion, and regardless what we're gonna do, we're gonna buy a truck one way or another, so there might be a little bit, if we save a little bit, there's gonna be a little bit extra put in the operation, but it's still just not going anyplace.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, for the differential, it's not worth it, yeah.
We're not doing any
Okay.
higher than that.
Okay, I'm prepared to call the question on the motion. Any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Those in favor?
Aye.
Motion is carried. And now I'm at item 8N, pre-budget approval for public works equipment, Councillor Hunter.
Move myself, seconded by Deputy Mayor Deschamps. Municipal Council one, authorize pre-budget approval for the purchase of a tandem axle plow truck with a set capital budget of $270,000. And two, authorize the pre-budget approval for the purchase of a 1.5 ton dump plow truck with a set capital budget of $95,000. And authorize staff to execute the required documents as recommended by the Committee of the Whole, Administration and Finance.
Thank you very much. The motion is on the floor. Discussion, if any. Hearing none. Those in favor? Motion is carried. And item number O, Jordan, Rooney, and Cedar Grove Road issue, Councillor Hunter. Am I in the right place?
Yep.
Moved by myself, second by Deputy Mayor Deschamps, the Municipal Council authorize that $100,000 be dedicated to performing topographical survey, geological, subsurface investigation, and preparation of drawings sufficient for utility circulation and engagement for the Cedar Grove project. And two, authorize that the remaining $100,000 be transferred into the Public Works Reserve as recommended by Committee of the Whole, Administration and Finance.
Thank you very much. The motion is on the table. Discussion, if any. Hearing none. Those in favor?
Aye.
Motion is carried. And now I'm at number 9, item number 9 on the agenda, which is the correspondence packages. Deputy Mayor Deschamps.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor John Hunter, that municipal council receives the correspondence listings for the following dates as previously circulated: January 30th, 2020, February 6th, 2020, February 13th, 2020, and February 20th, 2020.
Thank you very much. Discussion, if any. Those in favor? Motion is carried. And item number 10 on the agenda is approval of the municipal disbursement sheets. And where am I? Deputy Mayor Deschamps.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor John Hunter, that municipal council approves payment of municipal invoices circulated and dated as follows: report dated February 10th, 2020, 2020-00011 in the amount of $750. Report dated February 19th, 2020, 2020-00015 to 16 in the amount of $345,848.47. Report dated February 20th, 2020, 2020-0017 in the amount of $363,084 for a total of $709,682.47.
Very good. Motion is on the table. Discussion, if any? Hearing none, the vote is called to question. Those in favor?
Aye.
Motion is carried. And item number 11 on the agenda, I'm moving into bylaws. There are 5 bylaws up for approval here this evening. And I'll start with bylaw number 11A, a bylaw to amend. Councillor Cameron.
Yes, thank you. It's moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Hunter that a bylaw to amend bylaw 2009-53 to provide for a drainage works in the township of Edwardsburg Cardinal, the James Riley DeWitt Richter Municipal Drain, be now read a third time, finally passed, signed, sealed, and numbered 2020-09.
Okay, third reading. Discussion, if any?
Just a comment before we vote. As a new councillor, I've struggled with this discussion. There's a vast amount of complexity to it, and not being involved in the previous 10 years of it, struggling my way through it, I have found that very difficult. And I have seen in my I just struggle with the outcome. I don't know how to say this properly. I just struggle with it. It's such a complex issue, and there's so many mistakes, and I guess that's all that I want to say. I just struggle with it.
Further discussion, if any? Councillor Hunter.
I agree with our deputy mayor here. It is a complex situation, and they're no doubt that in my opinion, that there was a lot of errors made by the consulting and engineering firm on the way through. I think various councils over the years have struggled with the recommendations of our consultants and stuff on this, and I do believe that the council tried to do their best to our ratepayers that we could. Unfortunately, I don't agree with the act that governs councils over the actual input we have on how the Drainage Act works. And we have to take the recommendations of our consultants, whether we agree with the engineering firms or not. We're not engineers, so we have to accept what they say, even though various councillors over the years have questioned their ability on it. But unfortunately, it always seems to be the ratepayer that ends up paying the bill, as unfair as it may seem to be. And I think people have to know that really, on this issue, council's hands have been pretty well handcuffed all the way through it.
By the Drainage Act.
By the Drainage Act. But we really haven't had much to do, as bad as we feel about some of the outcomes of it. It really put us in a bad position, and I, as a farmer, particularly feel really bad about it, because this isn't the first Drainage Act drain in our township that I believe some of the farmers have taken a real shafting on. So, but unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about it. So.
Well, and, you know, as I said earlier today, when council acts on the basis of the best advice that's provided to them, they act in good faith on that advice, and sometimes, in this particular case, it was proven at the drainage tribunal that the advice that we received was incorrect, and now it's up to council to clean up the mess. Simple as that. Any further discussion before I call the question?
I just wanted more or less parrot what both councillors have said, and just to add that this has been going on since at least 2004.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Out of this, is there any way we can help the farmer?
Well, that is up to the individual to come forward to the treasurer and seek a mechanism of delayed payment. And that option has been opened and explained in at least once or twice. Through the CAO to the treasurer, am I not correct?
I personally have not spoken to the property owner, but I believe that there has been discussions, or at least an offer of an ability to come and speak to us in terms of making arrangements.
Yes, and I will add that the levy assessment is gonna come forth at the March council meeting. That will provide some opportunity in a more manageable payment mechanism.
Okay, and that'll come forward on March meeting?
At the March meeting,
Yeah.
correct.
And I guess the final comment, I'm gonna call the question here, but the final comment, I'm gonna make it, and the final comment is, there's a differential between the engineer and the consultings. And I think we have the preeminent drainage engineer in Eastern Ontario, Mr. Robinson. And I think that where council went astray was not getting their information direct from the drainage engineer and getting it through other sources. And I guess the big learning takeaway for me is that one should always err on the side of caution and do nothing without the approval of the drainage engineer, even though it may delay any action for a year, 18, 20 months. Get the recommendation from the drainage engineer directly. And these are the lengths of time that it takes. We all know that the County Road 2 petition for a drain on County Road 2 that will drain the Jones Rail area and the Greenfield area, Giant Tiger area, and the solar farm area. It's been pretty near 24 months in preparation and still not complete. So, I'm about to call the question on the motion.
Can I request that as recorded then?
Yes, recorded vote requested by Deputy Mayor Deschamps, D-E-S-C-H-A-M-P-S. Okay, I'm gonna call the question. Councillor Cameron, how do you vote?
Yay.
Councillor Dillabaugh?
Nay.
Nay. Councillor Hunter?
Yay.
And Deputy Mayor Deschamps?
Nay.
And the mayor votes yea, and the motion is carried. Okay, now we're on bylaw 8B, fire department establishment bylaw. We're introducing a new bylaw for third and final reading. Councillor Cameron.
Yes, thank you. It's moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Dillabaugh that a bylaw to establish and regulate a fire department be now read a third time and finally passed, signed, sealed, and numbered 2020-10.
Okay.
I have a comment, Mr.
Now,
Mayor.
we delayed this for 1 month for a few minor changes, I think, and public input opportunity. So, a discussion you wanted to start.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's just a clarification from the CAO, and that would be that up until now, or up until, well, we'll say now, the fire department has always followed a set of standard operating procedures. That is still under, that is how they still operate. Is that correct?
Through the chair, yes, there are standard operating procedures that the department follows, yes.
Thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, no further questions about the call to question, those in favor?
Aye.
Motion is carried. And, item 11C, the interim tax levy, and, Counselor Dillabaugh.
Moved by myself and seconded by Councilor Hunter that the move would be granted leave to introduce a bylaw to authorize the interim tax levy in advance of adoption of the tax rates for 2020, and this shall consist of first and second reading thereof. Councilor Chief.
First and second reading on the interim tax bylaw, those in favor?
Aye.
Motion is carried. Proceed to third reading, please.
Moved by myself and seconded by Councilor Cameron, that the bylaw to authorize the interim tax levy in advance of adoption of tax rates 2020 be now read the third time, finally passed, signed, sealed, and numbered 2020-11.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Motion is carried. Now, just need a minute here to straighten myself out. Goes there. This one goes here. And I'm at item, or bylaw 11D, which is another amendment bylaw. Counselor, or Deputy Mayor Deschamps. Too late.
Okay, so moved by myself, seconded by Councilor John Hunter, that the move would be granted leave to introduce a bylaw to amend bylaw 2019-63 to establish rules for reimbursement of eligible expenses of member council and municipal staff, and this shall constitute first and second reading thereof.
Okay, discussion if any?
May I start?
Go ahead.
Just clarification from staff regarding actually item number 8 regarding the cell phone reimbursement. In the paragraph A, it states that the, B, 8B, where it states that a receipt, detailed receipt would be sent in if the counselor chooses to go that route. However, down in D, paragraph D, it indicates that, it doesn't indicate it just says that it would be part of their paycheck and we would be subject to all taxes with CA. So, which is it? Is it going to be put in by expense, or is it going to be automatic?
Just I think we're talking apples and oranges here through the CAO, to the CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I think could be.
Treasurer, would you like to?
Certainly, there,
review that?
B indicates that you have the option to be reimbursed for your cell phone.
Yes.
And in order to do that, you need to provide a receipt indicating such.
Right.
And then that would not be considered that would be considered a cost to the township, so then it's not a taxable benefit. If you do not provide a receipt indicating that you have paid a
Yes,
cell phone bill,
correct.
then the allowance is given, and an allowance, CRA sets the rule that an allowance is taxable. Because then we don't have it as an expense, the township can't indicate that as an expense.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. That's
There's
my mistake.
two
Sorry.
options.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, further questions if any? Okay, hearing none, I'm about to call the question on first and second reading. Those in favor?
Aye.
So first and second reading meets unanimous approval, and the bylaw can proceed to third reading.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councilor John Hunter, that a bylaw to amend bylaw 2019-63 to establish rules for reimbursement of eligible expenses of members of council and municipal staff be now read a third time and finally passed, signed, sealed, and numbered 2020-12.
Okay, calling the question on third reading. Those in favor?
We have a
Oh, yes,
recorded
sir.
vote.
Recorded vote?
Yeah.
Recorded vote requested by Councillor Hunter. Okay, I'm gonna call the vote. Councillor Cameron, how do you vote?
Yay.
Councillor Dillabaugh.
Yay.
Councillor Hunter.
Yay.
Deputy Mayor Deschamps.
Yay.
And the mayor votes yea, and the motion is carried on third reading. Okay, now I'm at 11D, which is a CUPE Collective Agreement Memorandum of Agreement to the agreement. And Councillor Hunter, I believe you have that.
Move myself, second by Deputy Mayor Dishon, that the mover be granted leave to introduce a bylaw to enter into a memorandum of agreement with the Canadian Union of Public Employees Local 231102, and this shall constitute first and second reading thereof.
Okay, discussion if any? Hearing none, those in favor? Motion is carried unanimously, and the bylaw can proceed to third reading.
Move myself, second by Deputy Mayor Dishon, that a bylaw to enter into a memorandum of agreement with the Canadian Union of Public Employees Local 2311-02 be now read a third time, finally passed, signed, sealed, and numbered 2020-13.
Okay, calling the question on third reading, those in favor?
Aye.
Motion is carried, thank you. All right, now I'm at item number 12 on the agenda, which is the CAO's administrative update. I'll let the CAO highlight his report before I call for the motion to receive the administrative update. So, to the CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just highlight a couple areas. So just under professional development, I'd like to recognize Clerk Rebecca Williams on her successful completion of the municipal law program. It comprised of 4 units and completed and received the certificates early in this year.
So please pass on our congratulations.
I will highlight the business fair once again coming up at the Leo Boyven Community Center in Prescott on March 6th and 7th. The official plan, the appeal period has passed, no appeals received, and we have now received the original approvals in certified official plan from the counties. So, well done, everyone. Building, the chief building official is working on an annual report with respect to the costs of administering and enforcing the Building Code Act. And that report will be coming forward at the April Admin and Finance meeting. Under bylaw, just wanted to highlight a couple public education areas that the officer is working on, which is respect to garbage being placed out in advance of the day of pickup, reminding that it needs to be in a secure container. Also, an education campaign will be on derelict vehicles, and it will be included in the interim tax bill insert. Under Treasury, just wanted to note the MAP audit. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities conducted an audit and confirmed compliance with the terms and conditions under the Municipal Asset Management Program grant agreement. So great work once again by our treasurer. Facilities and recreation, just noting that the Spencerville Arena is scheduled to close on March 16th. And the Ingredient Center will remain open until the end of May. Under Public Works, just as probably as you're driving through the township, you'll notice that there are some potholes that are appearing and some areas that may be heaving. So the crews are working on, when they're not plowing snow, filling in potholes and placement of bump signs. And also within the next few weeks, the half-load signage will most likely be going up. Under environmental services, so preliminary work at the wastewater treatment plant has started in preparation for the SCADA upgrade. Also note that that environmental services had a little bit of an issue at Henry Street Pumping Station, but the pumps was pulled in and repaired. Also of note, during scheduled maintenance, our main workstation computer at the wastewater treatment plant decided to crash, and our spare unit has been placed into service. As noted with the James Riley DeWitt Richter drain, the appeal period is now ended. The third and final reading of the bylaw was before council tonight, And coming forward at the March meeting, we'll be repealing the 2015-68 levy assessment bylaw and adopting a revised levy assessment bylaw. Under fire department, just a note that, and I believe that the chief mentioned that at the last committee meeting, that the new rescue truck chassis has arrived and construction on the rear body component will be starting shortly. The chief is just finalizing the fire safety plan with Cruise Rail and Greenergy. And the automatic aid agreement with the Township of Augusta is scheduled to come forward in March. And on another positive note, we have received the letter and documentation that we are in compliance for 2019 with respect to the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act.
It's time to start again.
Just in time to begin our 2020 campaign, yes.
Okay, thank you very much for highlighting your report. I'm gonna ask if any members of council have questions with regard to the report. Start with Councillor Cameron.
Yes, just clarification on the Henry Street pumping station. The pump was pulled and repaired. Was the pump damaged at all? Or was it just a routine repair?
No, we had some issues, so there is some damage done to the pump, and I'll have the Director of Operations just maybe give you a little bit more information on that.
Through the chair, yeah, so basically what happened was one of the chains for pulling the hoist that corroded and snapped and went into the impeller of the pump and jammed in there, so staff had to go in, do a confined space entry and pull the pump using some unique methods, I'll say. They did get it out, got the chain out, and the pump is working again, but at this point we don't have a backup pump, so we're looking at probably gonna have to get a new pump just to back up, since Henry Street has such high flows. Basically, 2/3 of the island section go to Henry Street Pump Station.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Any other questions for the CAO? Okay, so I have one as it pertains to the last page there, the fire department. I back and forth to Prescott regularly and watching for signs of activity from Greenergy, and I have not seen their trucks moving. What is the situation here? Fire chief continues to work with Cruise Rail, Greenergy on their fire safety plan. This was in the works before the chief went on holidays. Do they have their approvals or whatever it is they need?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, they do not as of yet. There are certain components that are required to be in the fire safety plan. That has been clearly relayed by the fire chief, and I believe that the latest edition has just arrived back, and I expect that it will be finalized shortly.
But my goodness, this has been over 3 weeks.
That is correct, but the information was provided on what was required for that plan. So if that information is not provided, it can't really approve a plan.
Is there a misunderstanding as to what was required, or?
I would say that there is no misunderstanding as of now what's required. I can't speak for the owner, but it's pretty much laid out with respect to that in the fire code, of what those requirements are.
Okay, I'm following this one pretty carefully because of the connection with the development there. So is there some way that I can get an update on this sometime before the end of this week, so I know where we stand at the end of this week?
Yes, I can certainly advise council of where we stand by the end of the week for sure.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other questions with regard to the CAO's report? I'm going to call for the motion to receive the CAO's report, and I believe that's you, Councillor Dillon.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Cameron, that West Valley Council receive the CEO's administration report as presented.
Thank you very much. Those in favor? Motion carried, thank you. And so now I'm at item number 13, which is council inquiries or notices of motion. Does anyone on council have anything to bring forward under council inquiries or notices of motion? Deputy Mayor?
Just an inquiry, and I missed it in the Schedule C portion of the fire bylaw, fire department bylaw. And I'll just read section C, item D, if I may. It's that volunteers complete a criminal record check which indicates no record of unpardoned criminal or summary convictions or offenses that would adversely affect public trust. So my question, that obviously applies to new hires. What happens if there's a situation where a volunteer is already a member, or a trainee has been charged with a crime that has that same sort of thing? Is that covered somewhere else? I didn't see anything that covered it in this bylaw, and I apologize that I missed it, but does that apply to all township staff? And what would happen if there was a situation like that arose?
So through the mayor, I don't have that answer right at this particular moment, but we can certainly do some follow-up and.
Well, okay, but I would like to state a basic principle of law, and that is that an individual charged is deemed innocent until proven guilty.
Correct.
I don't know how we can act otherwise. That is the law in Canada.
Don't misunderstand my question. A charge is a charge. I understand that. I understand the difference between a charge and a conviction. My ask is that what happens if you have a conviction while you are an employee that would adversely affect public trust? That's my.
Well, if you have a conviction?
A conviction. That happens while you're an employee. Not, because this to me didn't cover what happens if I was the employee and I did something that caused me to be convicted of a crime that could adversely affect public trust in that position that I have. It's not covered under there.
So the bylaw is silent on that issue.
The way that I read it, it was, and it's I apologize, I was flipping through and I missed it, but I.
Well, to the larger question though, is that not dealt with in our hiring bylaw? I mean, theoretically, the fire department bylaw would be trumped by a hiring bylaw or an employment bylaw or employment practice. Is that not dealt with in that other manner?
And I would anticipate that it would be, but on a matter like this, I would prefer to give a little bit more refreshing before I answered off the cuff.
Fair enough.
So if you could, yeah.
While we're on that, too, is under our hiring bylaws for non-unionized staff, how is it dealt with under our CUPE agreement? It's spelled out it all in it.
So, in all fairness, we'll produce a little report that deals with this.
Negotiations and that,
Yes, so,
Okay.
yeah, so,
Thank you.
first and foremost, with respect to in a new volunteer hire, this is a very positive step forward with
Yes.
respect to that.
Absolutely.
But let us just get back to you on the other.
Thank you.
Okay, item number 14 is the mayor's report. I have a brief report this evening, quite a number of items actually. So for the benefit of council, I just want you to know that the CAO and I will be meeting with Novatech on Friday, March the 6th, that's 2 Fridays from now, to have a first look at the first draft of the Ontario job site submission that is being prepared. We know from previous experience that these types of things generally go through 3 to 4 drafts, and this will be our first look at the first draft. With regard to a certain purchase of land on Edison Road and County Road 2, I can report that the proposed buyer is still interested, and I did forward to the CAO today an email which I had received from the proposed or the potential buyer just this afternoon. But I want you to know as well that on Friday, the CAO and I met with Prysmian on 2 issues. One was the matter of the hydro needs study, and the general manager signed the form that we needed to have signed, and we got that information. And I don't know whether I've reported it or not yet, but the engineer that's working on this has determined that with the completion of this report, Hydro will automatically download and release all of the information that we need for our study. So the study is now going extremely well, and we'll be in a good position for the regional meeting on March the 11th. Now, I don't know whether I've reported on that regional meeting, but the Independent Electricity Service Provider will host a regional needs meeting on March the 11th in Belleville, and I intend to be at that meeting with this report in hand. I'm quite concerned about availability of hydro in that particular area. I think I should also say that the second item of discussion with the general manager at Prysmian was the question of that little bit of land that we need from Prysmian in order to make the potential sale parcel a little bit larger. And we ran across a new wrinkle. It's not the kind of thing that I can report in open council, but we will be having an in-camera session on Thursday night, and I will bring up that matter for discussion at that point. It will be all verbal. Next item. I think I've circulated to all members of council an invitation to attend the Bioindustrial Innovation official grand opening of their Eastern Ontario office, which will take place on Wednesday at 10 o'clock at the Apex building in Brockville. I would invite all members of council to be present if you can be. I think this is a good news story all the way around. And just point out to council that the Township of Edwardsburg Cardinal was the first client to step up to the plate when the new engineer was hired and provide an assignment that's going to serve us well and him well as he gets his projects up and running. Item number 4 on my report. I'm going to circulate right now to members of council a submission summary that's being prepared to be appended to our Ontario Job Site Challenge application. And this is intended to be a summary that goes over and above the issues that were identified within the actual application form. So I'm circulating it to council. It's in its first draft form. I would like to have some response from council before I put it in its final form and circulate it to the consultant for inclusion as an appendix. I'd like you to take your time and read it and present me with your comments. Item number 5 on the agenda, the mayor and the Port General Manager will attend Marine Day on the Hill tomorrow, that's February the 25th, to support the Chamber of Marine Commerce in their various political initiatives as they meet with senior members of the federal cabinet and various other federal members of parliament. Item number 6, the Enbridge gas extension and expansion projects. So I think I have reported that in December the province announced that they would be releasing, I think it's $310 million for extension and expansion projects. And Enbridge Gas is now circulating letters to various municipalities asking them if they have projects to submit. Well, we know we have a project to submit, and basically what they're asking us to do is to reconfirm to them in writing that we want our project to go ahead and the reasons for it. So the letter arrived today. The staff is preparing a draft response, and I'll finalize the response to Enbridge before the end of the week. But just for the benefit of this council, because you may not be aware of the background here, but the Township of Edwardsburg Cardinal has taken, I think, 3 major steps to support our local project. And the first step that we took was that we agreed by resolution, and it's on the books and it stands as our position, that as a township, we will forego our revenues that we collect on natural gas pipes. In other words, for every mile of pipe through our township, we get a grant in lieu. And this will be new piping, so we would be eligible for new grants in lieu. So we've agreed to forego that revenue over the period of time that the company is recouping their capital costs. So that's one thing that we've done. The other thing that we've done, of course, is supported the concept. There was one concept we didn't support. We didn't support the concept that the cost of expansion would be spread throughout the entire network. But that concept was overruled by the Energy Board, and the Energy Board agreed to that, and for the past year and a half, Enbridge has been collecting $2 a month from every customer in their network to finance the extension and expansion of the network. And it's a portion of that money that they've collected that the province is making available for extension and expansion. The Ontario Energy Board has now initiated a series of public hearings as to what should be the criteria for extension and expansion projects. We're still a party to the hearing, but we're not active party to the hearing. I'm still being circulated, but we're not responding to the circulation. I don't know whether to get into that issue or not. I'm going to see what advice we get from our friends at Enbridge. And last item, police boards and the new Policing Act. And Councillor Hunter, Councillor Dilba, and Councillor Cameron attended the meeting, the first initial meeting in North Grenville. There was a second meeting in North Grenville where we could almost come to a consensus as to a suggested model of police boards for Grenville County. Didn't quite gel. We went to the regional policing meeting in Brockville last week. Not a lot of new information there, except that the presenters from the Solicitor General's office indicated that the regulations are not yet written. If you've got suggestions as to how we can apply the new act to your county, we would like to hear from you. Now this is all going someplace. Today I received a draft letter from the mayor of North Grenville to the Solicitor General, suggesting that here is the model that we believe will work in South Grenville. And she's asking all 5 mayors in South Grenville to sign on to this letter. Now I think that the proposal that they're putting forward does, with one exception, meet the consensus, and I intend to sign that letter before Friday of this week and get it off to the Solicitor General's office. And I'll make sure, and I'll ask Rebecca now, if she would please, when that letter is finally put together, would you please make sure that all members of council are circulated on it?
No problem.
Thank you very much. Okay, so that's my report, and I'm calling on Deputy Mayor Deschamps.
That's me. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor John Hunter, that municipal council receives the mayor's report as presented.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Motion is carried, thank you. And we're at item number 15 on the agenda, the question period.
If you have time following the meeting, I would like to speak to you, maybe perhaps tomorrow morning, about some items in your report. The only other thing I wanted to go back to is 8.1, the authorization for the vehicle.
8.1, what was it
Yes,
again?
that was the authorization for the recreation department vehicle.
Oh, yes, okay, go ahead.
And that was a 2019, financed over 48 months,
Yes,
rather than a one-time payout.
yes, that's correct.
Okay, at a cost of $42,192,
Based on that amount.
based on that amount, okay.
In other words, the monthly payments are based on that
Based on that
capital
amount.
cost.
And what is the vehicle?
Well, I don't know that the vehicle has been identified, it's a concept at this point in time. It was an offer for the sale of new 2019s that had not yet been sold while they were available.
Okay, and the offer came from,
We don't know that, we
Okay.
don't ask that.
all right. Okay, thank you.
Okay, and as far as the discussion, I think if you've got the time, we'll do it tonight because I'll be
Okay.
gone at 6:30 in the morning.
Oh, sure, okay.
Okay, all right, and so that's the question period. We have no closed session this evening. The chair is looking for the confirmatory bylaw. Councillor Cameron.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Dillabaugh that a bylaw to adopt, confirm, and ratify matters dealt with by resolution be now passed, signed, sealed, and numbered 2020-14.
Thank you very much. Those in favor of the confirmatory bylaw, the motion is carried. And then the last motion, the motion to adjourn, Councillor Hunter.
Moved by myself, second by Deputy Mayor Dishaw, and this council is now adjourned at 8:41 PM.
Sir.
Thank you very much. Those in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you.